What's good, yappers? I'm back with another Zach Yaps. So, as you may have known if you watched my 2025 games tier list, which you haven't, go check it out. I became quite the Trails fan. I know it says Legend of Heroes, but it's only Trails character. I'm sorry, blame Bracer Guild, alright? Actually, don't blame them. They're very cool. They have a lot of cool merch. Go check it out if you're a fan. Point is, throughout 2025, I got super into the Trails series, and I played every single game. I mean, I didn't finish Trails' first chapter, but I'm going to, okay? But yeah, I played from Trails in the Sky all the way to Trails through Daybreak 2, unfortunately. And now, finally, Trails Beyond the Horizon is here, and I just finished it the other day, and I just need to talk about it, okay? Like, I can't keep these thoughts in my brain anymore, because what was that game? So I am going to structure this sort of into halves, I guess. I want to give some non-spoiler thoughts at the beginning, and then as we get further on, I will go into much more spoilers. And then there will actually be a part where I'm going to deal with some stuff that technically the player shouldn't even really know about, so I will give a warning for that too in case you finish the game. But like, I'll give more details once we get there, don't get me wrong, but just as a warning, there will be a little bit of stuff I want to talk about that might be a bit controversial. I don't know. Point is, I want to start spoiler free with an asterisk, because you cannot talk about this game without inherently spoiling the rest of the series. So if you haven't played the games up to this point, I can't not spoil them, because this game is the culmination of 12 other games. Like, you just kind of have to know. I'm sorry, like, this isn't the video for you. This is not the game for you. This is the most unbeginner friendly one possible, but that's fine, because they just put out the best beginner friendly Trails game ever called Trails in the Sky. I'm pointing over here because that's where my Switch 2 is, and that's where I have it on. You don't know that, so it's kind of weird that I'm just pointing, but don't worry about it. Anyways, my point is, if you're not, you know, deep in the Trails trenches like some of us are, you're not going to care about this video. I would recommend looking up some stuff about Trails in the Sky first if you want to get into it. Hell, did the fucking demo... I can curse. This is my... What guidelines am I trying? If you want to try it out for yourself, just try the demo. It's on literally everything. Trails in the Sky first chapter. I don't know why I'm shilling. I'm trying to talk about a goddamn game. All right, let's talk about Horizon proper. I think it's needless to say that I absolutely loved this game. I think it has some of the most incredible things Trails has ever had in the entire series, like bar none. Some of my favorite emotional moments ever. Some of the greatest character scenes, like the writing in some of these scenes is so good. Like the echoes of stuff that I haven't seen since the OG games, even Crossbell. And I think especially the Reen route, because obviously, like I'm sure as many of you know, the game has 3 routes with Van, Kevin, and Reen. So you kind of get, you know, a good mix of the main 3 countries. Fuck Crossbell, am I right? No, I'm just kidding. There's actually a lot of evidence that Crossbell might be a big part of the next game, but we'll get into that later. But I mean, with all that being said, I will say this game was a little mismarketed, I think, because I think a lot of people were expecting this to be another game like Trails into Reverie, which would have been nice, because while I think everybody loved Trails into Reverie, we can all admit that, you know, at its core, it was not a game that from the outset moved the whole series forward a whole lot. So it felt kind of sad to have this whole 3 protagonist system in a game that didn't end up like doing anything as huge as you might have thought with that premise. So when this game got announced and we had 3 protagonists, 3 of which had all been protagonists already, which was a little different, because we didn't know who C was, obviously. I think we just figured that it would be sort of a 3-pointed story where everybody has something equally important going on and everybody gets equal focus, and it's this big connected plot. That's not what this is. You find out very quickly, this is Daybreak 3 through and through, and that's not inherently a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. I think Van deserves to have another game to spread his story. Not just Van, but the entire Calvert cast. But I do think the marketing somewhat harmed it, because it very much focused on the route system and the multiple playable characters. but this is a Van game at its core. You are going to be playing as Van twice as long as the other two characters. This is a Van story that also features Rean and Kevin. It's sort of how I look at it. And like I said, this does not make it bad. This does not do anything to make the quality of the story worse on its own. But the main problem I have with this, and this is not like this is not a spoiler discussion per se. I'm going to be very spoiler free with how I say this, but Act 1 of the game is entirely Van. There is no other routes. You just play as Van the whole time, and it's spread across one day. And the pacing of Act 1 is, for lack of a better word, atrocious. I feel bad saying that, but I was very, very bored playing it. And that made me really sad because it felt like, a lot of people say it felt like they went back to Daybreak 1 stakes. And I guess that might be true. If we're talking about like the very beginning of Daybreak 1, sure, maybe. But at the same time, I don't really agree because Daybreak 1 obviously had to set the stage, and I always felt like it did it in a way where it set the stage, but still gave us a lot of interesting things to deal with. I thought the introduction of Almada, or A, as it was called at the beginning, like, that was really interesting, and having to piece that piece by piece. The problem with Act 1 of this game is it doesn't really give you much to chew on. It gives you these little things, but they're so vague or abstract or just not explained until way later in the game that it's like, okay, well, interesting in a vacuum, I guess, but like, I don't have anything to latch onto here. And it's very disappointing because I played the demo, which was essentially the prologue chapter, back in December when they released that. And the prologue is awesome. It's you know, a little bit slow, but at its core, the characters all know what's going on and you're just going. It gives you the context you need and it tells you why you're there and go. And then as a reward, you get all of these little conversations between all these characters that you know that are now interacting for the first or not first time, depending on who they are. And you get to see that. And it's awesome. It is such a good intro to the game, especially with the Reverie-like setup. And I was so excited. I'm like, wow, that's how the game starts. I can't wait to see where it goes. And I wasn't expecting it to go nowhere for 10 hours. Obviously, that's being a little harsh. Yes, Act 1 introduces a lot of good stuff. And the end of Act 1, once you get introduced to a new party member, is actually really good. It's just, it is really long. Like, I can't stress enough. It took me probably 10 to 12 hours to beat Act 1. And if it only gets good at the end, like, we could have been using that time for more, don't you think? It's especially weird because there are some pacing issues with Rean and Kevin's route that I'm like, if we had diverted more time to some of this stuff, I kind of feel like we'd have a better paced game. And I do think if we're talking about flaws, the only real big flaw I can put on this game is pacing. I think it has, unfortunately, kind of some of the weirdest pacing in the entire series. And if the plot was any less actually really good, it would probably be a lot lower on my list, just because the way the story is presented is kind of baffling at points. But the story itself is like some of the best in the entire series. So I'm like, all right, I could acknowledge that this is not probably the best way to tell this story, but damn if I don't love the story that's told. But I mean, beyond that, you know what, actually, I said that was my only critique, but if I have to levy another critique, I think this is sort of a debated point, the gameplay itself, because I've seen a lot of different takes on this game's feel and system compared to the Cold Steel and Reverie games, specifically Cold Steel 3, 4, and Reverie, because those were, you know, a bit more upgraded than Cold Steel 1 and 2, which were really just Trails to Zero again in 3D, with less features actually. So I've always loved the Daybreak battle system. I liked it a lot in Daybreak 1. Daybreak 2 was mostly good, but it introduced a problem that I think I really noticed in Horizon, and that is enemy HP bloat. Some of these enemies just have way too much HP, which on its own, whatever. Like, all right, the boss battle takes a bit. But what I can't fucking stand is when these enemies do roars that just bring back like almost 100,000 health sometimes. And it's like, all right, cool. We added another fucking 10 minutes to the fight. And like, I think that is just such a point of fake difficulty to me, when the only way you know how to make your boss harder is for it to go longer or for it to like heal itself. And like, I know it's like, well, you get to heal yourself, blah, blah, but it's like, listen, when you're trying to design a good boss fight, that's just not the way to do it. And like, I am not someone who actively searches out a challenge. I play these games on normal. I played half of them on easy because some of the older games, just because it was like, these just aren't my kind of games, and you know, that's fine. That's just how it was. But I was disappointed that it felt like even on normal, this game got pretty frustrating at certain points because bosses would do that. They would either do that, or there are certain boss fights. Now this might be a skill issue because I know there is like precedent for this back in some of the older games, but it's just certain bosses, they would do moves that would essentially give them like, it felt like as many turn orders as they want. And with the addition of the Brave Order systems, which is returning from the Cold Steel games, it kind of felt more punishing, where it's like you really have to time out your moves. And if you have like a defense one up that's keeping you alive, if that fucking drops on one turn, half your party could get wiped, and that's just it. And it's like, that's not the kind of difficulty that I really enjoy, because it just feels like brutally punishing. And there's always some level of RNG in a game like this, so it just gets a little frustrating. And unfortunately, the enemy HP bloat kind of extends to the overworld too, where it's like, I like to play these sort of as an action game as much as I can, but it feels like with certain enemies, they're really trying to fight you on that and be like, nuh-uh, you should go into a command battle. And it's like, well, if you're gonna give me the option, then why are you making certain enemies so hard to kill? This game even introduces some enemies. This might have been in Daybreak 2 as well. I don't entirely remember, but it felt more annoying in this game. Certain enemies that don't have reactable attacks, like they don't glow yellow, they just kind of do continual damage to you if you let them go, but you can't stun them either. So it is annoying with enemies like those. It's like they're already forcing you to do the boss battles as command battles, so I don't really understand why they want you to do the command battles for a lot of these common enemies too, when it takes a lot longer sometimes. And sometimes it doesn't. Like, I don't know, it depends. But like, I just wish, like, if you're gonna make a system where I get to choose how to play, I don't think you should try and push me to play one way or the other. That feels like a complete abandonment of the idea of that system. But I mean, overall, like, I know this sounds negative, but like it's a few choice enemies that I'm really complaining about here. Overall, the game is still very fun, and in the like 55 hours I played of it, I was annoyed maybe in the last like 10 hours of my gameplay. And I mean, hell, by that point, the last 10 hours are mostly cutscenes. I have never been one to rate Trails games based on gameplay alone, so these minor faults I have with it pale in comparison to the experience that I got from playing it with the story. And when the gameplay works in tandem with the story, like what happens in the final chapter of the game, that is perfection in Trails. Like, we will get to it, but this game has some of the best gameplay to story moments in the entire series, bar none. So I think with that, that's kind of all I can really talk about in regards to the game without spoilers, because it's very hard to talk about the main story of this game without talking about spoilers, because honestly, the entire story is build up until the ending, which I mean is the case for a lot of these Trails build up games. But like, unlike Cold Steel 4, there's not necessarily this narrative. I mean, you know, the president of Calvard wants to go into space. You have to figure out why he wants to do that, because there seems to be more to the story. That's the plot. The whole game is building up to why, and finding out more and more and more and more until you find out the truth at the end, and you're like, holy shit, you know? So, yeah, I mean, it's as simple as that, really. But yeah, I mean, from here, I think I've made my overall opinions pretty clear. So if you were, I guess, I don't know why you'd be on the fence with this one. Like, you've already played 12 games. I guess here's the thing. If you really hated Daybreak 2 and you're like, man, I don't know if I want to continue with this series, this game is so much better than Daybreak 2. I promise you. Daybreak 2, in fact, I will even give this game the rare credit that it makes some parts of Daybreak 2 a little bit better. I still don't ever want to play that game again, but I will admit that the story has now been made a little bit more important than it seemed in that game. It's still like not that important, and honestly, sometimes they bring stuff up from 2 and I'm like, oh, that happened? I don't even remember that. So maybe I'm stupid. But anyways, I would recommend it even if you despise Daybreak 2. Because this is just a genuinely good game. I think it's one of the best Trails games in a long, long time. Granted, I also thought Daybreak 1 was one of the best games in the series. Not a lot of people seem to agree with that, which is fine. Everybody has their own opinions, but it seems pretty largely agreed that this one is the best in a long time. So, yeah. All right, now let's talk some goddamn spoilers. I know it would be easy to jump right into the ending, but I want to sort of go over the game just a little bit as a whole, because there's a lot of interesting stuff along the way, and a lot of people are a lot of the critical people of this game say that nothing happens until the end, which on some level is kind of true, but on the other hand, I do think there's a lot of really cool stuff that happens along the way that shouldn't just be brushed off as, oh, it's just build up for the end, is blah, blah, blah. Like, I understand that feeling but I think we can get trapped in the idea that because this was pushed as the beginning of the final chapter, it had to move the story forward. So every time the story wasn't being moved forward, it was like, oh, this is a waste of time. But I think that takes away from some of the best written moments of this game, which actually have nothing to do with the main plot. They're just very well written character moments. The number one standout I think I gotta give this game is Yorda. I did not give a fuck about Yorda or Ix in Daybreak 2. I thought they were annoying. I thought they didn't add much. I really just didn't care for them. But fuck. After this game, I really like Yorda. Seeing how Yorda changes and how Ix takes that, how it hurts him, because he thought that they had gone through this hell together and like they could do whatever they want now. And he feels broken because he doesn't want to, maybe doesn't want is the right word, but he's afraid to change. He's afraid to change like Yorda is trying to do. And he's taking that as an attack on him because of his own, insecurity. And I'm like, that is some of the most fun writing we've had for these kinds of characters in so long. Because the problem with Cold Steel as a whole, I mean, there's a lot of problems with Cold Steel. There's a lot of problems with all these games. Don't get me wrong. It's just that Cold Steel has some inconsistent writing. Let's say that much. Cold Steel tried to do a lot of gray characters, and people got very, very sick of it because there's too many. After a certain point, it's like, okay, can we have somebody who's just evil or whatever? But there's a lot of people who were evil for the sake of being good in Cold Steel. And Daybreak has the whole Calvard games have had a much different perspective. Calvard has had you work with Ouroboros more than any other game any other arc in the series, and I think it is very much a part of showing Van's mindset that evil people, rather, there are no evil or good people in a nutshell. We're all like made up of our experiences, and people who do bad things are not, even terrible things don't have to be bad forever. It doesn't mean that what they did had a good reason. Like the guy who, dropped off the nuke in Cray Village in Daybreak 2, that's never going to be taken away, but he still wanted to try and do the right thing in that game. That was an example of that. Yorda and Ix can never take back all of the innocent people that they've killed, as Yorda even says, but that doesn't mean she can't try to be a better person from here on out. Now, obviously, if you're looking at this from a real world perspective, then it gets a bit more blurry because, like, well, you're ignoring the law. But this is a fantasy video game. Like, let's not get too crazy with it. I think the moral here is one that's very good. And I mean, we've already seen it with Ren. And I think Yorda is a very interesting spin on the Ren idea because Ren didn't have resistance outside of herself. Obviously, the Grandmaster, she lets you do whatever you want. So if you want to leave the society, that's that. But yeah, I'm just very excited to see where the Yorda and Ix plotline goes. Although Ix can come across kind of annoying in this game, I think his actual storyline going on is really cool, and I'm very excited to see where it goes. Also, I gotta give props to Ix's English voice actor. Some of the line reads in this game, he did fucking incredible. I didn't know he could like scream like he could in some of these lines. You can really feel the pain and anger that he feels from feeling betrayed, but he's like also simultaneously angry at himself, and he knows it. And he hates that Arkride sees right through him. And I think that's just, if there's any one highlight of Van's route, I think it's absolutely the Yorda Ix plotline. Obviously alongside the Vestiges plotline, and then that kind of also coincides with the Agnes plotline. The Agnes plotline is kind of weird because it's like, it's not very evident to you throughout the game. Like obviously the big culmination of it is in, yeah, fuck it, let's talk about this now. Let's go route by route, because it'll just make this easier. The Agnes confession scene is probably the next big thing in Van's route. This, I think, was one of the best written scenes in Trails in a good while, I would say. Granted, I would also say that about the scene on Nemeth Island in Daybreak 2. As much as I hate that game, I don't hate that game. As much as I don't like that game, the Ren stuff is really well done and really just powerful. Like, I think it's very good. I really liked seeing that side of Harwood. I think it just makes his character a lot more interesting. But the Agnes scene, you know, is very interesting because like it felt like a very, I keep saying things like it makes it sound like I don't like Cold Steel. I do. I really like Cold. I love Reen. You're gonna hear me gush about Reen when I talk about his route. I love the Cold Steel games in general, but I am going to say that the rejection scene felt very like planting your feet on the opposite end of the spectrum compared to Cold Steel, where, you know, it played like a Persona game. You can date whoever you want, essentially. This was saying the opposite of that. Van makes his own choices. He is not a player insert, and he did not see Agnes as a romantic partner. And like, I think that's fair. I was quite happy with that development personally, because it was always a little weird to me. And I think the way they just handled it was very well done. I liked that Van was honest with it. I liked that Agnes clearly was hurt by it, even though she expected it. And even though she, as we learn, kind of intended for it to go that way, it is very clear that there was a part of her that really wanted to be wrong. And for him to change her mind about what she was going to do. Like, in a lot of ways, it was really unfair to Van, really, because it was more than a confession. It was a plea for help, in a sense. Because obviously Agnes doesn't want to do what she does at the end of the game, and she had to find that strength to do it, or rather get rid of like the regrets, right? Live life with no regrets, sort of Van's whole thing. She kind of used Van as a way to do that, and I think that's going to be a real thing in the next game, because obviously, like, you know, Agnes isn't going to stay dead. I think we all know that. But Van is probably going to call her out for being like, hey, you got on my ass for trying to sacrifice myself, and now look at what you did. But I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but we're already in the spoilers. You know what happens. All right, but let's move on one more time before we talk about that. I want to talk about the Vestiges, which I think might be called Remnants in Japanese. Correct me on that if I'm wrong, because I did find that interesting, because Vestiges and Remnants have just slightly different meanings, not like big differences, but like it is interesting to me. The Vestiges were an unexpected part of this game for sure, and I will say, the Vestiges are the most like Kingdom Hearts thing I've seen in this series. Well, okay, to be fair, the moment I saw the fucking society, I was like, oh, this is Organization 13 in this universe. And I'm not entirely wrong, but yeah, when we get into the Vestiges, I was like, oh, this is Dream Drop Distance now. Okay. How they explain the Vestiges at first and how you actually understand the cradle to work later on sort of changes how I think of them. I don't know, it's hard to tell my opinions on them, because when you're first introduced to them and who they are, it's kind of implied that they're like time traveled versions of them. But then later on, when we see how Renee uses his alter core, he's pulling versions of himself from extremely similar cycles, but not quite the same. And like, I almost wonder if that's actually what's going on instead of like literal time travel, because the only thing that needs to be done is that the space-time pressure needs to be destabilized. The system needs to recognize that something is not right, that people who are here should not be here, so that they can worm their way into the system so that, someone of Clodel can reset the system. But you know what? I like the vestiges as a concept overall, and I think it's a very interesting idea. There's certainly a lot of them, which I was not expecting as much, but I'm interested to see where it goes for sure. I do want to talk more about the vestiges, but one of the things I want to talk about is kind of related to something that was data mined. So I'm not going to talk about that now in case you don't want, to know that, because some of the data mine stuff, should the players really know that? I don't know, like not really. One of the other things I want to talk about is Mare's words. If you didn't know, those are just in the game files, the blurred out words. So we kind of know exactly what she is. Like I said, I will save that. But if you haven't seen them, then you can just wait a little bit and I'll talk about them. Yeah, the point is, overall, I think the vestiges are a unique idea. I hope they don't overstay their welcome in the sequel, is sort of how I'm looking at it. Because I think they will cause some controversy, for sure. I already see people talking about problem with time travel mechanics, and I get it. But at the same time, I do have a question, because like loop theory has been around since like game 3. So I don't know why we're getting shocked that time travel is a part of this now. Hell, even in second chapter, there's some dialogue with Chloe that, she should not be as much of a genetic match for her ancestor as she is, because she's so many generations ahead. And yet she's almost an exact match. And I feel like that means something. I don't know what, but I feel like it means something. So obviously the rest of Man's Route kind of gets into the finale. So let's put a cap in that for now. Let's talk about Reen Route for a sec. I would say Reen Route starts off a little slow, but it's been so long since, well, not really that long since I just played the games last year, but it feels like in-game time. It's been so long since I've seen these characters that seeing the Class 7 cast again and how they've reconnected and what the ones that haven't connected and, have gone on and done their own thing, what they've done, seeing that is so nice. I also just really like seeing how Reen's grown. He acts much more like an adult. He carries himself a lot better, and he has a lot more confidence. He learns to sort of take things in stride. You see that in his relationship with his peers as well. I don't know. I just thought the way he was handled was very well done. I think the coolest part of the Reen's route is definitely during the second part of it, when Reen and Crow start noticing that they see a different space than everyone else does. Now, immediately you clock this because of the normal ending of Cold Steel 4, where they both go up into space while Crow dies, and then Reen becomes Ishmelga Reen, as we learn in Reverie. Now, I remember when I played Cold Steel 4, I thought it was very bizarre to have two different endings, because first off, the normal ending, you have to get first, no matter what. And it always annoyed me because you had the thing that you needed to stop Ishmelga, but Reen just kind of doesn't think of it, and he just does it anyways. But the point is that needs to happen once, so that the Reen and Crow of this cycle have that vision, because a version of them have experienced it before, and Reverie already made it clear that was important before. So I understand now why that was the way it was, and it makes me realize that a lot of things that I was sort of unsure about in Trails have probably been done for a specific reason when it comes to gameplay purposes like that. Now, going into part 3, it's mostly just the quest for searching for Kafai, which is obviously very cool. Getting Steve Bloom to play Kafai, one of the best casting choices probably in this entire series, if I'm being honest. He kind of does like a variation of his Green Goblin voice, a little bit less evil obviously, but still conniving and very wise. But yeah, sort of playful, very Master Yoda-esque. Kafai is very much a Master Yoda-esque character. Trails has always been very Star Wars coded in certain ways, especially in just how it treats war, I find. Sort of very action figure-y kind of war, which is kind of funny because it didn't used to. In Trails in the Sky 1, war is never shown, but the effects of it are treated very seriously. So it's funny that when we see war in a game like Cold Steel, it comes off very differently. But at its core, like, Reen's route is kind of hard to talk about because it's not finished. Like, the whole game, he's looking for, you know, to cross blades with the Black God and find his true blade. Granted, he's also trying to find out what the truth of the space program is. And all of these routes end right when the rocket launches, except for Van's, which is the end of the game. So we don't find out what the truth is until obviously that after point. But as a result, we don't really get a conclusion to either of the two plot lines brought up in Reen or Kevin's story, which means they have to be continued in the next game, which is going to be interesting for reasons we'll talk about in a sec. I do want to just say overall, though, I did really enjoy Reen's route. I liked seeing his clash with Shizuna again. That was really, really cool. I love that he held his own. I feel like Reen is in such a weird, inconsistent power scaling phase. At the end of Cold Steel 4 and Reverie, they just weren't sure of where they wanted him to be, and him like immediately losing to Shizuna in that short story kind of pissed me off. Not like in a serious way, just in a way where I'm like, man, you better get your fucking revenge later. And you know what? He did. They were gonna fucking go for it if you know, they didn't get interrupted. But yeah, no, I'm excited to see where it goes. I really just love seeing him interact with all those characters again. You know, I just want to see more of them. I hope we get to see more of Class 7, honestly. All right, and then Kevin's route is, it's interesting. I would say Kevin's is definitely paced the worst. Not necessarily because of what happens in his routes, but because of how spaced out they are. And this is because Kevin knows too much. As a character, Kevin already has a suspicion of what's going on, and they don't want us, the player, to see too much of that. This game is very secretive with this information, and it really doesn't want you to know things until you're allowed to know them. And this does leave the pace of the plot feeling very trudgy sometimes, like you're trudging through mud just to get some goddamn answers. But I liked seeing what I really liked from Kevin himself. We'll talk about the picnicking front in a second. I like seeing character regression, and I know that sounds weird, but the thing is, when you have a series as long running as this, when characters come back, the main thing they usually do is, here's how I've changed due to my development, look at how I interact with everybody now because I'm different. And that's obviously great. We love seeing the characters we love change and grow. But realistically, not everybody's going to stay the same with the changes that they make. Sometimes you fall back on bad habits, sometimes you need to, whatever. So it was really nice seeing an example of a character that was not as good as they were previously left off. This is not Thousand Hand Guardian Kevin. This is Heretic Hunter Kevin. And he's done the exact same thing that he did in Trails 3. He's left Reese in the dark. Once again, he's taking everything on himself, even though he doesn't really want to, and he's burdening himself with this persona that isn't really him. But what I love is that seeing it from his perspective, in a different way than Trails in the Sky 2, where we see what he does, but not his thought process, we see his thought process here, and you see why he was successful as a heretic hunter. Because when he does force his emotions down, when he does pretend that he's this hardened, cold-and killer that doesn't care about anyone, he is so easily able to see people as tools to be used to get closer to the goal that he needs to achieve. And when you think about it that way, and you look back at Trails in the Sky, the second chapter, you realize he was doing that the entire game. He was always using Estelle or Joshua or whoever to get closer to Weissman so that he could kill him. That was the only thing he cared about. What makes this different is that this is paired with the picnicking front, which obviously is filled with some of the most colored background individuals of the entire series. And I've always loved the picnicking front. I said this about Daybreak 2 as well. I think Nadia and Swin were the best part of that game. I loved seeing them interact with Lapis again, and I loved seeing Rufus again. Rufus was fucking hilarious in this game, I gotta say. Not because they made him like extra funny, it's just his deadpan delivery of like everything is so fucking good. I absolutely love just how, you know, he takes everything in stride, and it's so fitting for his character because the only thing he's ever been emotional about is living up to his father. And like now that he's done with that, he's just like, Like, I'm just here to look after Lapis, man. And oh, I'm broke. I love the fucking joke that the fucking CID closed all of his offshore bank accounts, so he's just broke now. I'm like, oh my god, that's so good. That is so funny. But yeah, I really liked specifically Kevin and Swin's connection events. Those were really, really well done. I love that Kevin saw himself in Swin, because he actually did something similar with Joshua. He said the same thing to him in second chapter or third. I don't remember which one, but he pretty much said the same thing to both of them, which is you two have the ability and have been changing. You've been changing from who you are, and you're living life the way you want to now. And you need to keep doing that, because I can't do that. And it's interesting because after third, it kind of felt like, you know, maybe he was trying to do that, but sometimes there needs to be a heretic hunter, and he was picked for the job. He was picked by Nina, you know, the church version of Nina, and you know, he did it. But I really enjoyed the segments of learning the truth behind Hamilton. I really enjoyed that tower, and I loved how it kind of related back to the towers from the Sky games, the rural arcs. I know a lot of people don't really like Kevin Act 3 because it feels like not a lot happens. But I will actually kind of defend that one, because I do like the character moments and the quiet moment of exploring the destroyed Cray village. And I like the fact that you have to settle in with the fact that Professor Hamilton was the one who spread the Genesis around and inadvertently led to this disaster. This blood is on her hands, and you have to come to terms with that. You know, we see what the plan was and why this was being done, but it's interesting. It's a everyone is trying to solve this issue that affects everyone without telling everyone that it affects them all. There's a lot of self-righteousness that is just very interesting to see how each character thinks, for sure. And then obviously it ends with Kevin being unable to pull the trigger, and then the other vestiges show up, and that is pretty much that. All right, let's talk about fucking Renee becoming a Grendel. No, we're gonna wait a sec, because before that, obviously the big reveal, Project Startaker, Project Leviathan. The real goal is to destroy the Cradle of Time, the Septarian of Time, Lycorn's chest. That might not be how you pronounce it. I don't remember what it was. I'm sorry, I'm a fake fan. This finally confirmed one of the longest running theories in the fandom. There was always some level of loop going on, but I think people were a little unsure, like, you know, is this another loop after the Great Collapse 1200 years ago? Is this a simulation? That's still on the table, actually, if we're being entirely honest. Is this a time loop? From what this game tells us, we know that the Great Collapse 1200 years ago, that was not the last loop. So obviously the Septarian of Time rewinds 1200 years or however much back to the Great Collapse, after the Great Collapse. Whenever humanity reaches a certain sin value, specifically uppercase S, lowercase I, uppercase N, which to me is telling me that it's not literal sin, perhaps. Like, it's not literal evil. That's perhaps a part in it. But, I mean, if you want to take that into account, we know that the last loop, the Great One, won, and it carried on another 50 years. And we also know from Kafai that the reset process is initiated once the Septarian of Steel is claimed, which is very interesting, by the way, because that confirms that in every single cycle, fire and earth becomes steel. But it means that, like, these battles happen many times over. The Battle of Yormund happened, or Operation Yormund happened many times, and it worked sometimes, and it didn't work other times. And you know what? It like makes the whole Chosen One narratives not as Chosen One as it becomes a monkey in a typewriter situation, because I think the biggest reveal to me was that we are on cycle 11,999. Like, this has been done 12,000 times, and we still haven't found the solution to this. So this isn't some like perfect route or anything. This has gone wrong so many times and I am increasingly interested to see how this is going to be solved. Now, obviously, they try and destroy it, but I mean, it's literally controlling space-time, so of course it just rewinds itself to be fine. And then Amelia, which I guess I haven't really talked about Amelia, but it's hard because she doesn't really do a lot in this game. Obviously, she was Hermes in the last one, but she gets her real character here. I think the biggest fucking craziest thing with her though is that she gets shot down and she's the statue that Kevin collected and he mentioned back in Sky 2nd chapter. How? Like, okay. Like, I know the story wasn't entirely thought out, but like, all right, even I give it like, all right, the Septarians probably figured out by like Sky 3rd, let's say. Kondo, how are you like, yeah, so I'm gonna have a robot that's gonna get shot down and then sent to the past, and then they're gonna collect it years later, and it'll be like burned up from the atmosphere, but no one's gonna know what it is. And also it's the sign that this is a failed loop to begin with. In game 2 of like however many this is gonna be. Also, when Kondo says this is the beginning of the final chapter and we're like 90% through, I'm sorry, I don't believe you because we have at least 3 games left. There's no way they're doing the Septarians of water and wind in one game. Like, I just don't believe you. I'm sorry. But anyways, let's get back to the topic at hand. So Amelia gets shot down and it completely fails. Also because of this attack, the thing's like, well, you guys fucking suck, so I'm gonna move up the reset to now, basically. And then at this point, Renee reveals his betrayal. And then he goes into a fucking Grendel mode. And I was just like, that was the moment when I was like, all right, I officially don't know what's happening and I'm just gonna enjoy what's happening and think about it later. And I've thought about it since. I don't know why he turns into a Grendel. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. I'm coming up complete blanks here. I don't know why. I know that Van is the Grendel of the end and that Renee says he's the Grendel of the beginning. And that's about it. Their fight is really cool though. That's probably the coolest final boss in any Trails game ever, if I'm being entirely honest. And I'm excited to learn more about why he is the way he is, but I mean, he seems to be in cahoots with Dr. Hamilton, obviously, because he goes to help. One thing I did find interesting, and I don't know if this is an intentional thing or it's obviously intentional, but I don't know. Let me just say it. When he's in the Grendel mode, he is extremely cocky and almost unfeeling in what's going on. You can tell this in his battle dialogue, and he's very overconfident. And I can't tell if that's just trying to make everyone hate him and not try to follow him, because he comes off like he doesn't care about what's happening, and he's like he kind of gives like a little fuck you to the president at the end. But then when he goes to Agnes and he gives her the altar core or the Genesis, he's immediately like, are you sure you want to do this? Like, you know what's going to happen. And that seemed real. That seemed like he was genuinely caring for her. He wanted to make sure this was something she actually wanted to do, because at this point, the loop's coming no matter what. Whether we get the save state or not, shit's gonna have to be redone. And I thought that was a very interesting thing. I don't know if it's trying to say that Grendel actually makes him like more aggressive, or if it's just he was trying to sort of play up the villain act. And I mean, there is a moment where he says, you know, during the fight, what do you really know about me? And that's true. We don't really know anything about him. So I'll be interested to learn more about that. And then at this point, we see the whole Clodo program. Everyone tries to stop Agnes from doing it. It's kind of funny because they're like, no, Agnes, we'll find another way, when it's counting down to like 10 seconds. And it's like, all right, I get we're just trying to stop her from doing it, but like, you're not finding another way. You're going to get reset no matter what, which is, you know, I get it. But it is just kind of funny, right? So then the reset happens and Agnes hacks into it. Essentially creates a save state for seemingly the beginning of Daybreak 1 as the reset point. So everything up to then gets reset. Now, what I find interesting about when we see the grand reset is I still feel like this has to have something to do with the Great Collapse, because if you notice, the very first thing that the Septarian of Time takes isn't people or anything, it's their phones, it's their technology. It takes mankind's progress first. and then it starts taking all this other stuff. I don't know what the implications of that are. That does feel like how all of this technology got lost for the Great Collapse. Obviously, there's still artifacts and stuff, so stuff still survives, but yeah, I don't know. I'm very intrigued. If anybody watching this has any thoughts about it, I would love to hear them. I would love to hear as many theories or whatever, because I think the ending of this game like really sets up nicely for some amazing reveals going forward. So yes, obviously Agnes ends up erasing herself to make this save state, making Van very sad, making me very sad because I really liked Agnes. And yeah, it was a fucking depressing ending, and I was just kind of in shock the whole time. This was the most a Trails game has ever really shocked me. There's been a lot of good twists. The biggest twist, I think, was definitely the Azure twist with Lloyd and the gang having already died. I really didn't see that coming. Which, while that absolutely could just be, you know, Septarian of Mirage antics from Kia, I wouldn't be surprised if that's sort of more maybe retroactively attributed to another cycle that she fundamentally changed with that knowledge, because, you know, she kind of has space, mirage, and time are, you know, the higher elements. They all have a connection with each other, and they all somewhat serve similar functions as Septarians, just in very different ways. But they all kind of affect perception in some way. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is, we see some of that connection, which honestly leads, so that's one part that is a somewhat connection that could lead to more crossbow involvement in the next game. But then obviously you have the City Hall leader Bannings, who is Lloyd's uncle, and then you have Senator Ryan, who is Ellie's dad. Tio's been helping you the whole game with the Grim Garden. Oh fuck, I didn't even talk about the Grim Garden. I'm not going to say much about the garden. I mean, the garden is technically where cycles get revealed in the first place, and Ren actually figures it out before anyone else. Novartis being from a past loop was not something I fucking expected at all, and him being a disciple of Epstein was not really what I expected either. Also, it annoys me that there's a giant black hole that apparently has all of the answers, and nobody acknowledges it. Nobody's like, nobody even says, well, let's not go through it, it's going to be dangerous. Nobody even says that, and I'm like, bro, just give me a fake reason to not go in it. I want to know the answers, and I know you're not going to give them to me. Fuck. So yeah, we have a lot of SSS connections. That was the point I was trying to make. Obviously not as much for Randy, but I mean, if the other three are coming, he'll come. I guess Yuna's a part of it now too, so maybe she'll come too. But at the same time, I feel like she'd probably be going with Rain's group anyway, so I don't know. Just briefly, I want to talk about how this can lead to future games, because I think this is probably the best cliffhanger in a long time. I would put it on the same tier as Sky 1's cliffhanger for almost the opposite reason. That was a very personal and emotional gut punch. This is a massive, world-changing cliffhanger that leaves us open for so many possibilities. Honestly, the amount of things they could do could warrant a whole video on its own that they might end up doing in the future. But what I want to say here is what I absolutely do not want them to do is to use it as an excuse to retread content and just like start the game as boring as possible. If they do that, I will be really disappointed, because we have the opportunity to do a Steins Gate, to do a ReZero here, where we get to see these things with a new perspective, because we know certain people know what's going to happen. I think it's more than likely, I think everybody who knew the truth of the reset will probably remember in some way. That would be my guess. If only Van remembers, I would find that a little strange. If only because, like I said, Reen and Kevin, their character arcs, they weren't finished in this game. So if they don't remember, I'm going to be very shocked. But you know, we're just going to have to find out. And that's the thing. Nobody knows what's going to happen next. So Falcom is in the best position imaginable right now to create a story that nobody could see coming while still feeling good. The other thing I want to also say that I really am excited but cautious about. The Septarian of Time is on a level unlike any other Septarian that we've seen. It is way more powerful than a lot of these other ones. I don't want it to be easy to deal with it. I want it to be almost impossible. I want it to be, if it's taken 12,000 loops to get close to beating it once, I want it to show us why. I want it to feel like we shouldn't even have beaten it at all, but we did despite the odds, you know, that kind of thing. And I'm very curious if Orpheus' final plan, the eternal recurrence plan, is a part of that. And why that would be a part of it, or what the church is planning, or all of this stuff. Because everybody has ideas for this loop. We've seen Act 1 of Hamilton's plan. So I'm very curious to see now what her next steps are. Also, obviously, we got to learn more about Rosette's past, because she was from the past loop, it's looking like. At first, it seemed like she was from the future, but now, is it the future if it was a previous loop? Because if you see what happens, it almost doesn't seem like it's a literal space-time loop. It's more like a physical loop in the area of the continent of Zemuria, which is a really interesting idea, and I want to know the mechanics behind it a lot more, which I'm excited to see. All right, now real quick, I want to talk about some data mine stuff. So if you don't want any of that stuff known, I would recommend clicking off now. The player is not technically supposed to know this, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's in the game files, so... So Mare is an interesting case because I was pretty shocked to learn that she just outright says, I'm the administrator of the Septarian of Time. Which, you know what, fair. Which is interesting because to me, that kind of implies that the Grendel is some aspect of the Septarian of Time, but it's also an aspect of the Genesis. Somehow the Genesis is like linked to the Septarian of Time, it seems. And I'm very curious how Epstein figured that out, because he seemed to know the truth of this world. But Mare also appears to be, specifically the Vagrant Demon calls her a holy beast. So I believe she is both the administrator and the holy beast of the Septarian of Time, which makes a lot of sense. Now, to be clear, this does not explain her connection to Yume's. I don't know how that's going to end up playing out, because we see that Mare is actually syncing with Yume at the end of Horizon. And that's a very interesting detail to focus on. I don't really know the implications of it quite yet, if anybody has any thoughts on that. I know some people think they're outright the same person, and I'm not entirely opposed to that, but I'm not entirely sold on it either, but I'm interested to see where it all goes. The other thing is that, specifically with the Septarian of Time, when she's talking about the Grand Reset, she says something about the Vagrant system. That's like the trigger. And I wonder if that has to do with Van's demon, which is the Vagrant Lord. It has another name, but I forget what it's called. And because we're being sent back to the beginning of Daybreak 1, he will still have the diabolic core inside of him. So I'm wondering if somehow that needs to be dealt with in a different way to figure out how to beat this thing. I definitely think there's a hint there. There's a key. I don't know if the save state bypassed the sensory block that the Septarian of Time puts on people. I don't know if they'll be able to understand Mare now, or maybe not. But we're gonna have to wait and see. There's a lot of interesting stuff, and I certainly think there's a lot there. Obviously, the other big thing, this isn't wholly about data mining, but I mean, the data mine part is that the three vestiges that fight Kevin and co are the revolutionaries, Sheena Dirk and the other two, fucking Auguste Aramis. Duh, sorry. But what's suspicious about Sheena Dirk is that she looks suspiciously similar to Agnes, who looks suspiciously similar to her mother, who looks suspiciously similar to her mother. We also know that President Gramhart was not present for the birth of Agnes. And a lot of people have started to think this is not natural. There might be some cloning going on or something. If it wasn't for the line about him not being there for the birth, I would say it's a little crazy. But when you combine that with the fact that Van looks at the statue of Sheena and straight up says it looks a lot like Agnes, it is clear that they want you to think this, or at least that they're setting it up. I don't know specifically how it would be working, but the fact that the Clodels have some kind of genetic link to the Genesis, it feels like they're somehow set up. They're used by Epstein in a way as a failsafe, a way to hack into the Septarian of Time, which does lead credence to the idea that they need to be the same for the stuff to activate. Very curious to see how that all plays out. I don't know what the future will hold for the series, but this entry has left me feeling very excited. I'm sure as I edit this, I'm gonna think of all the other things I wanted to say and talk about. There's so many interesting things about this game. There's so many places it can go from here. There's so much fun stuff to speculate about. I think the Septarian of Time is a masterful twist in how it's done. I can't wait to see where the series goes, and I hope if you played it, you feel the same way. If you have, like I said, any theories, any thoughts, I would love to hear them, because I just want to think more about this game and figure stuff out. Maybe I'll do future videos if I feel like it, but I love this game. Falcom, please. Kai 2, please. Please.